The other day, I heard something in a worship song, and it didn't quite click what it meant. It was really beautiful, and I thought, oh, that's really beautiful, but I didn't quite understand it. And they said that worship is a beautiful exchange of identity with God. And in church, we are walking through Genesis. So our pastor was explaining that in Genesis 1, how Moses wrote this in kind of a poetic rhythm. How he did this because that way they could sing it, they could do it in plays, they could tell it in story form. And he was telling us why Moses did that, because all of the Israelites have been in Egypt for 400 years. They didn't remember who they were, who had created them. They lost their identity. They lost who they were, their purpose, their destiny, their inheritance, everything that they were and who created them, they had forgotten about. And so Moses was writing this to help them remember, so they could teach their children, and their children could teach their children. And what better way to remember things is in song and story and play form. We remember that. And so as he was explaining that, all of a sudden that made sense to me. When these parents and these people and these Israelites would sing this song of creation and who created them, there was an intimate exchange of worship and identity in that moment, of exchanging of who they thought they were, and they were singing out who they really were, remembering, recalling, pulling on all of those history and of who they were created after, and why they were created, and what they were created for. Such an intimate exchange of identity with God in that moment. We are created in His image. So that it made me think about Jesus at the well when He met the Samaritan woman. And when she was like, I'm so confused because we worship on this mountain, but you say we have to worship on this mountain. And Jesus says, woman, you do not understand who you worship. Your salvation comes from the Jews. And if you truly understand what they worship, then you would understand who you worship. And there will be a time that you won't have to worship on this mountain, but you will worship in your heart and truth and spirit. He was reminding her in that moment of who she was created after. And that if she understood that creation story that they sang, that they talked about, that was passed down from generation to generation, of who she was created after, where that came from, and how God did it, and why He did it, she would truly understand how to worship in truth and spirit of who she is, and have an intimate exchange of identity. And she did, because Jesus opened her eyes at that moment and showed her who she was, who she forgot she was, how she had been buried under her sin, her conviction, her shame, her guilt. And at that moment, He exchanged the identity of who she was with everything she had that the world had put on her. And she realized how to really, truly worship in truth and spirit. So now when I hear that worship is an intimate exchange of identity with God, when we worship from truth and spirit of who truly created us, who put this destiny story, purpose and path in front of us and in us, who wrote our end from our beginning and knows our story. When we worship from a place of trust and knowing who created us, why He created us, and that He put each one of us here for such a time as this. So the next time you worship, really think about who you're worshiping, why you're worshiping. And I'm not talking about just singing and raising your hands and worshiping to a worship song. I'm talking about when you walk in your daily life, when you interact with people, when you go out your door, when you go to church, when you talk to your neighbor. You have an intimate exchange of identity because you are created in the image of God and you are to emulate God. And Jesus showed us how to do that. We are the hands and feet of Jesus. And when we worship God in truth and spirit and see who we were all created after, male and female, He created them. Then we understand who we truly are and how we have that intimate exchange of identity with God. Grace and peace.